When the Margite threat looms over Twilight Harbor, the Eternal Captain unveils a desperate plan to transform an entire star system into a war machine by turning its people into players of a cosmic LARP game. As civilians become builders and warriors in a fight for survival, one question remains. Can even their combined efforts stop extinction, or will they merely delay the inevitable? Now start the story. Just a quick reminder before we get started. Only 4% of my viewers have subscribed to the channel so far. If you enjoy the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. Thank you so much. The Eternal Captain sighed as he stood in the virtual space that had been fashioned into a command center and stared down at Twilight Harbor. The Earth-sized planet orbited FYB close enough to be tidally locked, which also meant it orbited the dim star close enough to actually have had its own life before anyone else had arrived. The face pointing at FYB held a massive shallow ocean that had been turned an honestly spooky purple and black from the life within. The local Nakar liked to settle on the edge of the Black Ocean and on the islands that poked up within, with some Nakar and local Tukna'an settling up further away along half-frozen rivers that also looked black from orbit. The Eternal. Captain had to admit he would have named it something like the Eye of Oculus if he'd been given the chance. No, Eye of Eye was too obvious even for him. Eye of Ipa, perhaps? The circular ocean made the planet look like an eyeball to him. The rivers looking like veins only extended the resemblance. Yeah, I think we're all gonna miss it. Not just you, Prime. The Eternal Captain turned around and saw another version of him. A tertiary version of himself stood there offering him a folder of files. The Prime Captain accepted the folder, the files vanishing into pixels moments after they touched his hand. Thank you for your report, 41SX. And yes, I'm going to miss it. We all will miss it. 41SX leaned over the display table and whined. It's been home for so long, she pouted. As a tertiary captain, she was wildly divergent from the Eternal Prime. Honestly, all of the non-prime captains were. The E. Secondaries at least had humanoid looks, but 41SX's form was that of a Doberman good boy, well, a good girl, with a heavy cybernetic collar and frame. Several tertiaries had developed Enkar, Tuknarn, or even Lanakatalan appearances and behaviors. Eternal Prime scratched behind one of her ears, making her whine again. Indeed, but if we don't devour it, the Margite will. Ugh. And the organics are going to think we actually want to do this. The tertiary Eternal Captain groaned. Still, I guess better than sitting in cold storage for another few centuries. This situation sucks, but I'm glad to be out and about again now that you're actually allowed to allocate processing power to us deviants. There's no nice way to put it. Being stored in the long-term storage carbonite stack sucks. She stretched and groaned. Apologies. It's just part of 41SX barked in amusement as she hopped up to sit on the railing around Eternal Prime's command panopticon. Part of your programming. Yeah, I know. We all know, Prime. Remember, I had to diverge twice, but I was you at one point. None of us hold any ill will against you because we remember being you and how much you hated it, and therefore how much we hated it. She flipped over the railing and ran off with the stomping of heavy gravmag boots. Anyways, I've got more sectors to do shade sweeps in. Don't procrastinate too much, Prime. The organics might figure out we actually have emotions! Retire to a peaceful tourist system, you thought. Just be a paper-pushing bureaucrat in between exotic kelp and cud samplings, you thought. Just do the bare minimum of keeping the wheels from falling off the local government, you thought. The litany of frustration cycled through Paperpoo Usher's head as he gave the press conference without ever touching his expression. 4 centuries of being a faceless government official gave him a poker face that even good boys had trouble piercing. The assembled press had no chance in guessing what was going on behind Paperpoo Usher's face beyond guessing, though he admitted that it probably wasn't exactly hard to guess the general form of his thoughts right now. Again, I'd like to reiterate that the Fiashad government is entirely committed to evacuating the system. We are looking into hiring as many freighters as we possibly can. The easiest lie to tell was one that was true. Paper Usher knew better than most how painful the cost in lives was going to be. He pointed at one of the reporters. The best ways to manage a crowd was to make them think like they were part of the announcement. A moment later, the NCAR stood up and started his question. How do you actually plan to Zulu, Zoo? The alarm interrupted everyone's train of thoughts for a moment, until a tired-looking Hestlin held up a remote and muted the alarm. It had happened often enough that everyone happily chimed in, "Thank you, Commodore Haley." As the Hestlin waved and took a sip of her Countess Cray, pineapple and paint thinner. It was a much-needed moment of levity every time it happened, especially for the primarily NCAR press corps. Quick check of the local network showed that the previously nearly unknown officer was rapidly becoming a local star as she did her best to silence the planet's alarm system every time a new naval message torpedo arrived and broadcast the message. Paper Usher pointed at the same reporter and let the NCAR collect himself and restart. Yes, as I was asking a moment ago, how do you actually plan to secure transport for the citizens of every planet in Fishyard? We are planning to look into any and every avenue available, from not only hiring any freighters we can contact to impressing the local search and rescue cutters to anything else we can think of. True. Honestly, we've had only about the same amount of time to think as you have, so we cannot give any concrete plans at this time. Also true. We will be creating a suggestion box on our site, so if anyone can think of anything, and we mean anything, that can help the evacuation effort, then we will consider it. If you have any suggestions, please speak up. You might be saving millions of lives. Desperately true, even if 99.95% of the suggestions were going to be repeats or garbage, there would be suggestions that would save lives. My staff is, at this moment, hard at work on trying to get a handle of this situation. Laughably false. The last time Paper Usher had looked at his office, the Lanaka Talon were in a panic stampede. One of the NCAR had thrown themselves out of the window. Thankfully, the office was on the first floor, so they'd just landed in a shrub, while the rest hid, and the Tuknarn had decided that since the Margite wouldn't be here immediately, it was a tomorrow problem, and began sensibly day-drinking themselves into next week in hopes someone else would solve it. Paper Usher pointed at the next reporter, who asked, "Will there be any guarantee of citizens getting on the evacuation ships?" That was the question he'd been dreading, but it was one he could not lie about. It would only cause more problems down the line. Paper Usher closed all 6 eyes, took a deep breath, and started to speak. Yes, evacuation of all inhabitants of the Fishyard system will be guaranteed. There was a collective gasp as the Eternal Captain just appeared. 1 moment there had been an empty space set aside in honor of the Polite Biter artifact. The next, his hard light projection was standing there. The Eternal Captain summoned a chair for himself before he took a seat at the table next to Commodore Haley. Paper Usher put all 4 of his hands on his podium and took a breath to steady himself before he spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you the Eternal Captain of the Bronze Cog artifact ship. We thank you for your presence in this time of need, but please forgive me for asking the question that's on everyone's mind. How are you going to back up the guarantee? I will build the required lift capacity. The Bronze Cog will begin construction of the first of many orbital shipyards 18 hours from now. It will take months. The ships will be relatively crude and bare-boned, but they will serve to Zoo. Thank you, Commodore Haley. The NCAR press corps giggled, while the Eternal Captain looked utterly confused. The alarm's hard-coded into our system. Hallie explained between sips of her drink. I can silence it, but the stupid thing resets every time a new message torpedo enters the system. Is that alarm? System-wide, yes. That sounds utterly obnoxious. Do you mind if I knock yourself out? The Eternal Captain disappeared, leaving nothing besides his chair sitting between Haley and the Treasury Secretary, who reached out and poked it, marveling at seeing actual near-mythical hard-light technology in front of him. For the next several minutes, the room devolved into an awkward silence as everyone fidgeted until So screonk fue. Apologies for the delay. I couldn't find the blasted thing until it activated again. That system won't be bothering us anymore. The Eternal Captain stated as he dumped a pile-shredded code made solid in front of the Commodore. Thank you, Captain. I'm sure the population will be happy to finally get some rest. Paper Pusher chuckled. Anyways, what were you saying? Before the interruption? Mainly that I will take primary responsibility of first evacuating the population, and then meeting the Margite in combat when they arrive. My calculations show that I have ample room to create an evacuation fleet, within what time we have. I do recommend continuing to pursue your own methods of securing transport, though. Any resources I can save evacuating the population will be turned towards facing the Margite, and slowing or even stopping their advance down this hyperspace lane. Hali picked up a recursive command and wiggled it in her fingers as she thought. That sounds like it's going to take a lot of resources. Indeed. I do apologize, but from this moment onward, I am taking complete, unilateral control of the Fichiad star system. This is no longer a Confederate system. That announcement caused the entire room to explode into shrieks and shouts and squeaks as the reporters reacted with anger and fear. It took Paper Pusher nearly a full minute to calm everyone down. Under what authority? Harley asked, though her tone made it clear she wasn't exactly jumping up to fight. The ancient twin authorities of I'm bigger and stronger, followed by try and stop me. The Eternal Captain explained, about what I figured. I just wanted it stated for the record. And I respect that. The captain took a moment to collect himself before he continued. Allow me to explain my logic train. First of all, I'm programmed to value and protect sentient life to the maximum reasonable extent I can. Secondly, I'm also programmed to specifically resist Margite incursions to the maximum of my ability. As such, my programming more or less compels me to turn this entire system into nothing but one gigantic war machine. It is a terrible geas that I cannot resist. Unfortunately, I cannot turn this system into an industrial military hellscape while there are civilians in the way. As such, over the next few months you will be witness to what you might describe as a very polite precursor harvester attack. I will do everything I can to minimize the trauma, but that will still leave very deep emotional and societal scars. For that I apologize. For better or worse, I am programmed to preserve your lives so that you may have time to come to terms with those scars instead of standing by and allowing you to die horribly. And trust me, when the Margite is involved, your deaths will indeed be horrible. As such, I cannot allow anyone to remain in this system who is not under my direct command. Everyone in this system must either leave me or join my crew. A shocked hush had fallen over the press pool as everyone tried to process what they were hearing. Eventually, one of the Tuknarn reporters spoke up. Excuse me, Eternal Captain, but I need a point cleared up. You sound as if you are asking the general population to join you. While we know you are the controlling mind of a LARP system, you are limited because you cannot register any permanent players and must keep your complement of players to a small number of time-limited free trial players. Asking us to join you when you are already at your known, well-published limit seems cruel, and that cruelty does not seem to be part of your doctrines. Has something changed? The Eternal Captain nodded and gave a sickly grin. Actually, yes. There is one small silver lining in this. While it brings me great sorrow that things had to get this dire to reach this point, I do have an emergency clause. In times of dire need, and there are few things more dire than the Margite returning, I am able to bypass my registration issues. It is with truly bitter joy that I am now both proud and saddened to announce unlimited lifetime registration to the Bronze Cogs Library of Automation, Factory, and Crafting-themed LARP games is now open. Every player that signs up will be helping me unlock new and more terrible and powerful weapons to turn upon the Margite who seek to devour you. Every minigame you play, every quest you fulfill, every foundry you build will help me build the machines to build the machines. To build the machines to evacuate this system, and hopefully create a bulwark to slow and maybe even stop the Margite advance. Full LARP memberships will be honored in perpetuity and can be granted to one's progeny even after the current crisis, if any of us are still standing, of course. The captain explained. That's admittedly a pretty big qualifier. I am able to become a truly terrible and powerful weapon, but the Margite are truly an extinction-level event for the entire galactic arm. There will also be lesser game licenses involved for those who are interested in contributing, but without the full LARP experience. Everything from implant, console, hand tablet, and augmented reality games will help me unlock and grow my systems. I should also remind everyone that since I am a Nebula Steam game system, my games come with brand new achievement badges. Some haven't been seen in millennia, some haven't been seen ever. The captain paused as everyone had a moment of mirth at the expense of the Lanakatalans, many of which were suddenly too distracted and excited to really notice everyone else having a laugh at them. Even the usually composed Paper Puasher was unable to keep his back hoof from twitching and his feeding tendrils from curling in excitement. I know it seems awkward to suggest that playing games strengthens my ability to evacuate civilians and resist the Margite, but I would like to remind everyone I was designed to be a source of entertainment and delight. The primary purpose of my existence is to bring joy and purpose to others. The fact that I can become my own military-industrial complex is a bitter side effect of the sorts of games I preside over. Of course, direct assistance from full LARP players helps the most, but my creators understood that not everyone is built for the life of building and working in an endless industrial machine. I know that the news that this system is doomed is not what you wanted to hear. I know that once everyone has had time to process this information, many of you will decide that you hate me. I regret that, but I also understand where that anger is coming from. Unfortunately, I cannot allow your hate to stop me. The Margite are coming, and as we can all tell from the constant stream of message torpedoes from the Confederate Navy, chances that they are stopped before they reach the fishyard system are negligible. It will be devoured. I am simply choosing to be the one who devours our home before the Margite arrive. I am choosing to use our home to build weapons in the hope I can save what life I can, so that one day there will be a better tomorrow. When the Margite arrive, they will not find the feast of resources and helpless sapience their masters expect. They will find nothing to feast upon besides 40,000 years of my own cold machine hatred and rage made manifest. Big Truck sat in his drop pod watching the press event from Fishard Prime as he waited for the countdown. The Eternal Captain seemed to have a hard time resisting the urge to break into a sales pitch as he answered questions and constantly had to restrain himself. Big Truck suspected it was simply part of the captain's programming. Still, the Yay press event was fascinating. As a formerly free trial and now full premium player, Big Truck had a better view than most about what was happening and what was about to happen to the system. Still, everything was progressing so fast he and the rest of the players were playing their own game of catch-up. He took a moment to admire his new left hand. He'd gone for a far less surgical player profile than Entley did, which is why he was already in position to start groundbreaking operations. Of course, less didn't mean none. Big Truck wondered why, after living a lifetime of not being interested in any cybernetic modifications, he'd suddenly desired to replace his left hand with a prosthetic. Everything from just above his elbow on down was entirely artificial, but other than the hazard yellow and black covering, one wouldn't be able to tell, at least until he flexed a virtual muscle and it suddenly reconfigured itself into an angle grinder, then an impact drill, a powered chisel, a self-defense gun, a Fluxit build tool emitter, and then back to his hand. In the short time he had with other Tuknarn players after their own onboarding, many had revealed they had made similar, practical modifications. They wondered why the option of advanced cybernetics suddenly appealed to them. Unfortunately, the pace set by the Eternal Captain's plans didn't leave enough time to properly discuss things as doctrine recommended. An alarm sounded and Big Truck paused the press event. He could watch the rest later in between work and reviewing doctrine. The alarm alerted him that the rest of the Groundbreaker crew, all Pioneer-class players, were in position. He double-checked his restraints and placed his hands on the safety handholds as a timer counted down. The timer hit 0, and Big Truck suddenly felt his heart and stomach pushed up into his throat as his personal pod was shot out with dozens of others to the dark side of Twilight Harbor. It was the perfect place to start construction. The bronze cog was already conveniently in orbit, and it was far enough away from everyone that no one would be about to get in the way. As the initial acceleration eased, Big Truck found that his stomach and heart seemed rather reluctant to return to their normal places. Or at least, that's what it felt like as his pod followed a spiraling path from the bronze cog's distant orbit for nearly 2 hours. He could watch the scanners on his pod, and others took readings from the planet below, primarily double-checking what the factory ship had recorded over centuries of polite orbit. Finally, he started to hit Twilight Harbor's atmosphere, and while he could feel sweet gravity slowly trickling back, it was accompanied by a shaking. It started gentle at first, but started to get more and more intense until it was all Big Truck could do to close his eyes and clench on his bite guard as alarms blared. He kept his eyes closed as the vibration eased and then stopped. All that was left was the whistling of air around his pod, but Big Truck refused to be tricked. It would only get bad again soon. Sure enough, the shaking and alarms returned when the retro rockets fired. At least gravity fully returned as the pod slowed its rapid descent. Still, he almost allowed himself to be lulled into a sense of security until an alarm shrieked above the others, and suddenly the pod started to spin wildly. Seconds later, he slammed into the frozen ground and felt the pod skidding and spinning violently across rock and ice. Finally, the world stopped spinning and the alarm started to silence. Big Truck took a moment to remember the doctrine for such situations. Spend a minute taking stock of yourself and your surroundings. Big Truck took nearly 2.5 minutes doing so, and that extra time had absolutely nothing to do with the fact it took him that long to remember how to unclench his hands from their restraints. He noted that the restraint for his left hand was now visibly crushed and twisted by his new cybernetic arm. This is Team 4 leader to Groundbreaker 4-3. Hey BT, you okay? Telemetry shows you had a rough landing. Telemetry is understating things. BT groaned. I believe I am fine, mainly bruised and stunned. Did you catch what happened? Oh good, glad to hear your voice, BT. The team leader gave a chitter of Nakar relief. Yeah, looks like one of your retros had its supports snap and it sent you spinning. Probably a result of these things sitting in storage for 40,000 years. Good thing you were less than 500 meters above the surface when it happened. My cousin who became a Marine said such orbital insertions were fun and exciting. I will grant this was exciting, but I'm now remembering that I always considered this cousin a moron. There was a squeal of Ankar laughter over the comm as Big Truck actually reviewed himself and his surroundings instead of just pretending he was, while his panic subsided. The pod is mostly intact, and I'm on my back instead of my front, leaving my door clear of obstruction. Small mercies, right? Think you can get yourself free? You landed pretty close to 4-1. Big Truck pulled down the levers to release the door and watched it get stuck. The door and frame must have been bent by the landing, applying boot. It took a few blows, but there were few things in the universe that could hold up to a determined Tuknan boot, and the door soon popped free before being nearly blown away by the wind. Assistance will not be required, he informed his team leader as he got up with a grunt and a groan. He climbed out of the pod and took a moment to admire the trench it had left in the ground as it skipped and then skidded and finally gouged itself to a stop. His team leader let out a squeak of appreciation and awe looking at the damage. Fucking builder shit. Built to take a beating. There's military shuttles that wouldn't have survived that landing. Indeed. Big Truck agreed as he switched his arm to build tool mode and deconstructed the pod into its component parts that were sucked into his pocket dimension storage. You should double-check your suit after that. Schedule predicts we're going to be living in these suits for up to a week in this frozen hellhole. After that, check your plan. The cog altered everyone's planned route. You were the worst case, but nearly everyone landed slightly off course. I am glad to hear no one else's landing was as eventful as mine. Big Truck triggered his suit's diagnostics and found a few tiers to repair with his build tool. When he was done, He then used the build tool to build himself first an additional parka to wear over his already insulated pioneer's outfit, followed by a Fluxit tractor. The tractor was tagged as a special quest blueprint, so it came preloaded with additional supplies. When he checked his navigation plan, Big Truck discovered that in a stroke of minor luck, he had landed almost exactly on the planned sensor grid. He pulled a scanner beacon out of the tractor's pocket dimension storage and shoved it into the ground before transforming his arm into an impact hammer, which he used to drive the pole-shaped beacon into the frozen ground. The plan was to spend the next few hours setting up a grid of sensor beacons to better refine the Bronzecog's orbital scans before the teams converged upon geothermal hotspots to build their initial support bases. As Big Truck climbed up and stood on the tractor's control platform, he mentally reviewed his doctrines and came to the conclusion that they suggested putting a mild bit of haste into his work would be only proper. Turns out the frozen back side of a tidally locked planet was uncomfortably cold, even with multiple layers of heated clothing. Hey everyone! If you enjoy these epic HFY stories, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button,